Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to another session of economy this week, wherein we'll take up all the important economy related articles which have appeared from 27th to 2nd September 2022, and we'll be analyzing these particular articles. Let's begin with the first very important article, which I'm pretty sure all of you have gone through or read about it, is related to Q1 GDP growth rate for Indian economy. First and foremost, before I give you data, whenever you say a quarter, I'm pretty sure all of you know it's a group of 3 months. For the month of April, May and June, NSO, National Statistical Office, will publish the data. In case of India, we calculate GDP quarter wise, we calculate GDP annually, that is a financial year also. Now, whenever they talk about, let's say, quarter-wise data, remember this. You can calculate GDP data in two ways. One, year on year, which is the most favorable one, which is calculated most of the times, and the data that you come across in the newspapers. For example, they say that the first quarter GDP growth rate is 13.5%. They are referring to year on year GDP growth rate. But apart from this, you can also calculate quarter on quarter, QOQ, quarter on quarter GDP growth rate. That is the first quarter, what is the GDP value, and the previous quarter, that would be the fourth quarter of the last financial year, what is the GDP value. We will find out by how much percentage the GDP has grown. That is the idea of quarter on quarter, sequential quarters GDP growth rate. I'll use this, wait for some time. Now, what are the important points given here? The GDP growth rate for the first quarter is 13.5%, the highest in the last 4 quarters. So, various newspapers basically stated that Indian economy is on a recovery path. The GDP will be increasing at a very faster pace in the coming days. However, there are certain concerns, we'll address that, and the recovery will happen. However, please understand this. What is important for UPSC are the following points. Don't worry about mugging up about the data. Why? By the time you write the exam, the data would have already changed. New data would be published by the government. RBI estimated that the GDP growth rate for the first quarter would be slightly over 16%. We have ended up achieving a GDP growth rate of 13.5%. What are the reasons why we have been able to achieve a double-digit GDP growth rate here? One reason, the private final consumption expenditure, PFCE. Let me show you a data here. Private final consumption expenditure has increased by more than 25%. And not only this, the government final consumption expenditure has increased, although it is just a marginal rise. And the gross fixed capital formation, which is nothing but the investment done by the private sector firms, private sector companies, a proxy for investment, has increased by 20%. Is it sufficient now? Is it sufficient? Although the investment has increased, the consumption has increased, no doubt these are good outcomes for Indian economy, good things for the Indian economy. Why? Whenever the consumption increases, consumption of the households, mind you, whenever the consumption increases, we always associated the consumption with rising demand and production. So with the rising expenditure in the form of the private final consumption expenditure, which is nothing but the representative of the household expenditures in the Indian economy, that is considered to be a good feature. That's the first point. Second important point, investment increasing is always a good feature. But if I make a comparison of these particular numbers, should you remember the numbers? Absolutely no, don't mug up the numbers. If I compare these numbers for the first quarter in the current financial year with the first quarter for the financial year 29 and 2020. Now many of you will ask me, sir, why are you comparing with the first quarter of 19 and 20? Because that was the pre-pandemic time period. I'm making a comparison because 19 and 20 first quarter is pre-pandemic. And if I make a comparison, then find out, you will realize that there is a slight rise or a smaller rise in case of both the private final consumption expenditure and gross fixed capital formation. And not only this, if you look at the overall GDP value, for the first quarter pre-pandemic for the financial year 19 and 20 was more than 35 lakh crore rupees. Now it is more than 36.8 lakh crore rupees. Very slight increase you will observe, around 3 to 4% rise you will observe in the GDP value when you compare the quarter one for the current financial year and the pre-pandemic level. Now when you compare that with the first quarter of the last financial year, that is what generally is done, you will get the data of 13.5%. So why are we discussing all of this? In economy, there is a term called as base effect. Remember this. In the economy, there is a term called as base effect. Base effect simply refers to the impact of an abnormal base on the data, or let's say the growth rate or the inflation rate in the current financial year. For example, in the last financial year, first quarter, there was still the impact of the pandemic. The expenditure was considerably lesser. The demand for various types of goods and services was comparatively much lower, subdued in simple terms. And when you have that particular number for that quarter as a base and you are making a comparison, that base because of the pandemic is an abnormal base. So on the face of it, you are achieving a very high GDP growth rate, 13%. But in reality, because of the subdued impact or a subdued demand in those particular quarters, your GDP number, although it is not just a normal number or slight hike compared to a normal number, it looks to be very, very big. Now, if just to prove the same point, if I make a sequential comparison, that is what was the GDP value in the quarter 4 and the GDP value in the quarter 1. Quarter 4 for the previous financial year, that is the financial year 21 and 22, and quarter 1 of 22 and 23. For the fourth quarter, the GDP value was more than 40 lakh crore rupees. Understand this. For the fourth quarter, the GDP value was more than 40 lakh crore rupees. And for the first quarter, GDP value is 36.8 lakh crore rupees. So if you make a comparison, quarter-wise, sequentially quarter-wise like this, the GDP has not increased, rather there has been a contraction in the GDP. That is one point of concern here. Second point of concern is the labor-intensive sectors. Remember this. The labor-intensive sectors such as construction, agriculture sector, etc. These are labor-intensive sectors. The labor-intensive sectors also have experienced a contraction. Second concern, because if you want to promote the recovery or if you want to say that Indian economy is completely recovering and it is going to boom now, the labor-intensive sectors have to perform very well. They have to expand, not contract. And the third very important concern related to the GDP is the whole economy is not out of the woods yet. In the coming months, we expect the Reserve Bank of India, along with many other central banks, to tighten, to increase the lending rates. And when they will start increasing or they will start to tighten the monetary supply, the interest rates will rise up, the issue of the credit will be affected, which will have a limiting impact on the growth. Is it the only factor here? No. Apart from this, what will be the impact of the global slowdown on the Indian economy? What will be the further impact of Russia-Ukraine war on the Indian economy? We are yet to see the full impact or the coming impact in the further months or down the line in the financial year. So these are certain very important points that you make a note of, rather than simply mugging up what has happened here, what has happened there, etc., etc. So based on this, I've given one static question, not a dynamic question, static question, but nevertheless an analytical one. Consider the following statements. If the difference between GDP and NDP is narrow, it represents a stagnation in the economy. What do you think? First and foremost, what is the basic difference between GDP and NDP? GDP refers to the market price of all the final goods and services which are produced in a territory, in a country for a specific time period. Whereas NDP will account for depreciation, will take out the impact of depreciation from the GDP value, that whatever is left out is called as NDP. Let me give a very simple example. Imagine the GDP is 100 crore rupees and the depreciation value is let's say 10 crore rupees. So out of the GDP, if you take out the value of depreciation, this is NDP, net domestic product. Now many of you will say, sir, what is depreciation? And many of my friends from the other side of the aisle, that is who have a commerce background, economics background, will be itching or will be very happy finally that something they've learned in their, let's say, graduation or in their studies has finally appeared in the discussion here. I will not enter into the CA's definition of the depreciation, that is chartered accountant definition. Simple understanding for UPSC is more than sufficient. The companies, whenever they keep on producing the goods and services over a period of time, the machines will become older and the maintenance and repairs have to be incurred by the companies. So what is the expenditure that is incurred by the company to replace a machinery is in simple terms called as depreciation. I know those who have, right, especially for amongst you people, those who have an economics degree, you will not agree with my definition. But this is the simplest definition, though not technically very accurate, required for UPSC. Now what is the importance here? I am saying that if the gap between GDP and NDP is narrow, it represents stagnation in the economy. The basic idea is whenever the gap between GDP and NDP is narrow, it is good for the economy. It doesn't represent stagnation for the economy. Why? In the GDP you will have investments. I hope you understand this. GDP can be calculated under three methodologies. One is the expenditure method, second one is the income method, and the third one is the production or output value method. And when you talk about, let's say, in the expenditure method, one of the components under the expenditure method is investment. So where it is present, I hope remember the formula C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Out of all of these components, what is I? I is nothing but private sector investment. Private final, the expenditure done by the companies in order to, right, let's say either replace the machineries or let's say add to the existing capital. Now tell me, I'll ask you a very simple question. Whether the company should invest and purchase more machineries, add to the existing machinery. I hope you understand. Add to the existing machine so that the production increases, or should the companies invest and replace the existing machinery? Between the first situation and the second situation, which is preferable? First situation, in addition to the existing machine, there is one more machine. So productivity will rise. In the second situation, the one machine which is already there, you are simply throwing it away. You will purchase one more machine. In either cases, companies have invested. But in the first case, the production will increase because there are two machines in the system compared to the second case where only one machine is there. So whenever you throw away the machine, replace that with a new machine, that is nothing but depreciation. So if the depreciation is very high, if you understand, if the depreciation is very high, the gap between GDP and NDP will become more and more or wider. And if you are investing, only part of it goes for depreciation, then the gap between GDP and NDP will be very, very narrow. Which means most of the investment that you are doing is to add to the existing capital, not to replace the existing capital, which is going to increase the overall production in the economy. So first statement is wrong. Second, between GDP and NDP, it is the NDP which is a better indicator. Just follow the discussion that we have done so far. You will realize, yes, second statement is true. Right option for this question is option B. Only 2 is correct. Let me go to the next article. Oil price cap plan. What is this idea? Very recently, there has been a discussion regarding the concept of oil price cap plan, which has been proposed by group of 7 countries or G7 countries. That's the first point. What is the second point? Now you'll have to answer, what is this oil price cap plan? Let me explain. When there was breakout of war between Russia and Ukraine, that is, Russia attacked Ukraine, one of the outcomes of this particular war has been that the crude oil prices have gone up. All of you will agree with me? The crude oil prices have gone up. And Russia has been able to sell this particular crude, although comparatively at lower prices in the global market, that is at a discount compared to what is the price in the global market. Russia has been able to sell to countries such as China, India, who are looking for energy security, and has been able to generate revenues, use the revenues or channel the revenues to fight a war against Ukraine. On day-to-day basis, China, or let's say on day-to-day basis, correct it, Russia produces 11 million barrels of crude oil, and substantial part of it, that is more than 50% of it, they use it for domestic consumption, and rest of it they export. And whatever they export, around 70% of these particular exports are done through sea routes. That is, vessels or ships are used to transport this particular crude oil from Russia to rest of the world. Sir, what about the remaining crude oil then? These are transported or these are sent to China, other parts of Europe through pipelines. This is the second point. Now what has happened here is, other countries such as USA, Canada, etc., they have banned the import of crude oil from Russia, and they want to stifle Russia in terms of the crude oil revenues they are able to generate now. So the argument of G7 group is, because Russia has been able to, even though sanctions have been imposed, has been able to sell the crude oil, collect the revenue, use the revenue, channelize the revenue to fight the war against Ukraine. We want to stifle, we want to reduce the revenues they are able to generate by selling the crude. And that is the precise reason. I'm going to the third point now. They have come out with a plan called as oil price cap plan. Oil price cap plan, which they say that will come into force from 5th of December. And they are asking for other trading partners such as India to join this particular oil price cap plan. Now the core of the discussion is, what is this plan in the first place? The plan is very simple. The buyers of the crude oil from Russia now will start dictating the prices. Simple logic. Rather than the seller dictating the prices, which generally happens in the market, as per this particular plan, it is the buyers who will dictate the prices. Dictate means what? Imagine the price as per this particular plan is capped at $60 per barrel. I repeat, the price as per this particular plan is capped at $60 per barrel. Then the buyer countries will purchase the crude oil from Russia not at a price above $60. They will have to purchase it below $60. Now some of you will simply say, sir, what if a country ignores this, goes ahead, purchases at a price more than $60? Because Russia will simply say, I will not sell it below $60, I will sell it at, let's say, $80. In that case, what if the other country goes ahead, purchases? Then the outcome will start. The repercussions will start. What is the repercussion? Whenever the crude has to be transported through the sea route, the vessels or the shipping companies will go for getting insurance. And this is the crux of the plan. They will go and get the insurance. There are many companies which will provide insurance. Most of them, that is more than 90% of these particular companies, are present in Europe, specifically in one city, London. Apart from this, there are other insurance also. There are other companies which will provide insurance. But these do not have the same reputation in the global market. The insurance provided by other companies are not accepted in all the places. For example, if you are transporting any good through, let's say, Suez Canal, the authorities in the Suez Canal will not accept the insurance from all the companies. There are specific type of companies whose insurance they will accept. Sir, what if I don't have the insurance from those companies? They will not allow you to pass through Suez Canal. Very simple. So argument of the G7 group of countries is, we will have this particular oil price cap. Those countries which will accept to purchase the crude from Russia below this particular cap, those companies, or let's say those countries, when they start transporting or use the shipping companies to transport, only for them we will provide the insurance. Right? What if a company is accepting to transport, right, but the price agrees is, let's say $80, hypothetical number, $80, much above the cap plan. Then the companies which are providing the insurance, they will not provide the insurance to the shipping companies. As a result of that, they will not be able to transport. This is how the plan is supposed to be implemented. Now, first and foremost, it is very difficult to bring all the countries on the same platform. Basically, ask India, China to agree to this particular plan. Very difficult. Very recently, a representative of USA government visited India, asked government of India to join this particular G7 grouping in terms of the plan as such. India has stated that we are interested. Let's have a look at the details first. Now they will have to even bring China on the same platform. You'll have to wait and see whether these countries will agree, because argument of government of India is very simple. If I'm able to purchase Russia's crude oil at a lower price, at a cheaper price compared to global market, I will look at my own interest. Ultimately, it's my own interest. I will look at my own interest and I will continue to purchase. That is exactly what has happened right now. Second important and by far the most important concern regarding this plan is, if you do this and Russia doesn't agree to sell, let's say at a hypothetical number at $60, what will happen? The crude oil supplies to the international market will further go down. And when the crude oil supplies further will go down, what will happen to prices? Prices will skyrocket. Already the prices are high. Prices are further going to skyrocket. What if Russia starts selling at those prices in the international market and start making better revenues? So that is one more very important concern regarding the price cap plan which has been proposed. So this is the gist of the article provided here. Let me go to the next article. Enforcement Directorate, ED has tightened the noose around Thomas Isaac regarding Masala Bonds issue. Now, first and foremost, UPSC will not ask you about this. They will not ask you who is Mr. Thomas Isaac, right? What party is ruling Kerala? What party is ruling the center? No, those are not the important areas for UPSC. What is the important area then? Idea of a Masala Bond. Concept of a Masala Bond is relevant, is important for UPSC. The idea of a Masala Bond is very simple here. A corporate entity as well as, let's say, government and government owned entity can go to foreign market, issue bonds in the foreign market where the underlying value of the bonds is in rupee terms, that is domestic currency. I will repeat the statement here. The corporate entity in India plus even the government owned entities, they can go to the foreign market, issue bonds in the foreign market and borrow from the foreign market. But the speciality about these bonds is that these are denominated in domestic currency, that is the Indian currency, rupees, as against the common practice where a corporate entity or a company will go to the foreign market and borrow in terms of dollars and repay in terms of dollars. We are not going to do that. We are going to issue in terms of rupees and repay in terms of rupees. Why this is a special feature? Whenever you borrow in a foreign currency and repay in foreign currency, we, that is the borrower, we is going to take the exchange rate risk. The borrower will be taking exchange rate risk. Whereas in case of Masala Bonds, it is the investor who takes the exchange rate risk. That is, in simple terms, imagine you have borrowed $1. Today the exchange rate is, let's say, 70 rupees. After 3 years, after 4 years, when you are supposed to repay, imagine the exchange rate is 80 rupees for every dollar. So whatever you have taken in terms of rupees, now you will have to pay more, not even accounting for interest. I am not counting interest here. So in case of the normal bonds, dollar bonds, which are issued by the domestic companies like this, the investor takes an exchange rate risk. Whereas in the Masala bonds, it is, just make correction here, in the normal bonds, it is the borrower who takes the exchange rate risk. Whereas in case of Masala bonds, it is the investor who takes the exchange rate risk. Now what is the issue here? What is the issue? Kerala government owns an entity by the name of KIIFB, Kerala Infrastructure Investment Fund Board. This authority was set up back in 1999, but the government in 2016 converted this into an entity owned by the state, which will start providing resources, which will mobilize the resources and start providing it to the state government. And Kerala became the first state in India to tap into a foreign market, issue the Masala bonds worth more than 2,000 crore rupees into the foreign market. Now what are the issues here? What is the problem? First and foremost, Enforcement Director stated that in their petition or in their complaint they have stated that Kerala state government did not have any authority to borrow from the external market without the approval from the central government. And because they have violated this, we will file a complaint against them under FEMA rules. That is the allegation that has been imposed by the Enforcement Directorate. Now they are simply looking at the Mr. Thomas Isaac, who was basically heading this KIFB. What was the role? What was the earning? What are his assets, etc. On the other hand, the state government of Kerala is alleging that it is a witch hunt by the central government. Central government doesn't have, or let's say ED, which is coming under the control of central government, doesn't have any control over the FEMA regulations. It should be the Reserve Bank of India to take care of the FEMA regulations. Foreign Exchange Management Act regulations, by the way. But apart from this, apart from the political slugfest, let's look at other important points. Every state government has implemented FRBM Act, as a result of which they are supposed to maintain the debt at certain level. And in the context of the state of Kerala, the state is supposed to maintain a debt of 29.6% of gross state domestic product. But because the state government, by using KIFB, has gone for off-budget borrowing, one more technical term for you to remember, off-budget borrowing practice has been done by the Kerala government. As a result of that, the actual debt of the government is not 29.6%, it is 42.8%. The debt of the state government is 42.8%, which is much higher than what is actually mandated. And the problem that has been flagged by Comptroller Auditor General here is, because the state governments have borrowed like this, specifically Kerala here, and they have used tools such as Masala Bonds where the interest rates are higher, this might simply push the state government into the debt trap. This might simply push the states into the debt trap like this. That is the criticism which has been levied by Comptroller Auditor General regarding this practice which is there in the newspaper. Done? Now regarding this, I have given a question here. Consider the following statements regarding Masala Bonds. These funds raised under such bonds are a part of external commercial borrowings. What do you think? Do you think Masala Bonds resources, or let's say revenues collected by the corporate sector, are part of external commercial borrowings? Of course, yes. Right? These are part of ECBs itself. Remember this. And the idea of ECB was there in the newspaper a couple of months ago. Why? The limit has been doubled by RBI. The limit of borrowing under ECB route has been doubled by RBI to $1.5 trillion. Please be very careful. First statement is correct. These are bonds which are denominated in rupees or dollars. No, these are not denominated in dollars. These are denominated in rupees. Second statement is wrong. Right option is option A. Only one is correct. Let me go to the next article. Fixed term workers contracts. First and foremost, what do you mean by the fixed term workers? Let's try and understand the basics here first. The idea of a fixed term employment was implemented by the government back in the year 2016. Initially, it was implemented in apparel manufacturing, and over a period of time, that is from 2018, has been extended to all the sectors. The idea of a fixed term employment, I'll start using the short form here, FTE, is simple. If you join a company, let's say you're person A, if you join a company B, and you have made a contract with the company B, for certain period of time that you will be providing the services to the company. That is either 6 months or 12 months. Most of the fixed term employment are of the same tenure, 6 months or 12 months. You will be working for this company only for this duration, as against the traditional contracts, traditional agreements between employer and employee, where there is no fixed time frame which is provided. For example, if you become, let's say if you become a part of the government, you work for the government, you will sign an agreement, you will sign a contract with the government, but there is no time period which is mentioned, such as let's say 3 months, 6 months or 12 months, that you will be serving with the government. Till retirement, you will be serving with the government unless you are forced to take a voluntary retirement. So argument is simple here. As against the traditional agreement under the fixed term employment, there is a contract which is signed between the employer and employee for specific time period for which the company will be hiring the worker, or for specific time period for which the employee will be working for the company. This was mooted as one of the very important labor reforms which will provide flexibility not only to the company but also to the employee. For company, this was told as a very important reform, pitched as a very important reform, for a very simple reason. The employer doesn't have to keep on bearing the burden of the employee. As per the economic situation, they can renew the contracts like this. That flexibility would be provided to the employer. But what has happened? As per the latest study which has been conducted, 80% of fixed term employees contracts are not renewed. Understand the statement here? 80% of the fixed term employees contracts are not renewed. Meaning what? Imagine there are 100 people who have signed the FTE contract. Out of that, 80 people contracts are not renewed after let's say 6 months or 12 months as per the contract. If the contract is for 6 months, after 6 months the contract is not renewed. If the contract is for let's say 12 months, after 12 months contract is not renewed. Which means after the term of the contract, these people end up not having job or losing the job. So that has been the point of concern which has been raised by various trade bodies which are mentioned in the article. Apart from this, one more point of discussion that has happened in this particular article is regarding what is the issue here. What is the issue related to fixed term contracts like this? One of the experts cites that whenever such agreements are signed, that is fixed term employment contracts are signed, the employer doesn't have any incentive to let's say invest on the employee. For example, if I join your company for a period of 6 months, you will not have any incentive to invest on me and let's say provide me with more skill set, provide me with the training of other aspects of the work, etc. That kind of incentive is absent because you know that after 6 months I can simply move from this company to another company. I can simply say, sorry, I will not work with you, I will work for some other company. So that incentive structure is actually missing, and that the expert says is the problem related to fixed term workers or fixed term employment like this. So these are certain points which have been mentioned in the article. Please go through these points. Next article is regarding solar modules. First and foremost, Government of India set up a very ambitious target of having a large capacity of solar electricity production in India. And when Government of India has such a target, they will promote private sector participation. The concern here is that the solar module and solar cell production in India is very less. And as a result of this, it should not surprise you when I say that we import lot of these particular modules and cells from rest of the world. And majority of these imports we import from our best friend China itself. Now targeting this particular practice, Government of India earlier, couple of years ago, implemented safeguard duties on the imports. And after a certain number of years, that is more than 3 years, Government of India has withdrawn the safeguard duties, and starting 1st of April 2022, Government of India has imposed basic customs duty. Remember this, basic customs duty, BCD, basic customs duty of 40% on the solar modules and 25% on cells. Along with that, there are other charges also which will basically take up these taxes higher up. Now the concern of the industry participants has been that because Government of India has announced these types of taxes, customs duties, the imports will become costlier, and when the imports will become costlier, the cost of developing a project will start increasing. And when the cost of developing a project rises up, your revenues, your incomes will start, or let's say profits will start shrinking like this. And that is a precise reason that there have been two requests which have been put forward by these industry participants. One, either you provide us with certain tax incentives, you provide with tax incentives, or else provide a grandfathering clause. A new term for you to remember. Provide a grandfathering clause, right, for the projects which have been announced or have been agreed to before 9th of March. Now, what do you mean by all of this? The participants are asking for tax incentives, tax breaks, so that part of the profits, if they start earning, part of the profits can be retained by them and it will become profitable for them to invest in such projects. Because their argument is, we agreed, we bid for the project, we agreed to develop this particular project even before you announced a basic customs duty like this. Now after we have agreed, we have signed the agreement to set up the project, you are telling me that I will have to pay customs duties on the imports, which I had not considered earlier. So either you provide me with the tax incentives, or second one, a technical term, grandfathering clause. What do you mean by a grandfathering clause? Imagine there is a provision which is applicable to you and the government will change the provision. But please understand, even though the government has changed the provision, for certain time, the earlier provision would be applicable to you. Sir, what do you mean by that? Let's take the same example. Imagine Government of India will provide a grandfathering clause. What does it mean? The solar projects are being implemented as of now, and these solar projects are importing the models, right? That is the solar modules as well as solar cells. Now if you go by the current provision, current guideline of the government, whenever they import module, they will have to pay 40% BCD, and whenever they import cells, they will have to pay 25% BCD. If the grandfathering clause is applicable, it simply means even before this particular BCD was announced, what were the tax rates, what were the provisions announced, same provisions will continue to be applicable for these projects. So the argument of these participants is that before 9th of March, any project which we have agreed to, extend the grandfathering clause to those particular projects. Government of India stated, not possible. We will try to provide you non-tax incentives. Tax incentives are out of the picture. We will try to provide any other incentives, any other assistance which is not in the form of the tax. Now what kind of incentives will be provided? You will have to wait and see. That will come later once the policy is announced by the government. So this is a discussion regarding solar modules. Next article, just a small information tidbit for you. RBI has proposed to set up a fraud registry. It has proposed to set up a fraud registry. If you are an ardent fan of, let's say, the TV series or let's say the OTT platforms now, very recently Netflix has announced the second season of Jamtara. Now if you are not an ardent fan, please don't worry, right? Is it going to be asked in UPSC? No way. And if you have watched that particular TV series, you will know that there are a lot of frauds which are basically, right, done upon. Lot of cheating that is done upon using digital methods such as making a phone call, using OTP of other bank customers, etc. Now should you read or should you start looking at the web series now? Please don't do that. Not required for UPSC. Now what I'm trying to do here is the same thing. RBI says using many technologies such as phone calls, what these cheaters or let's say fraudsters are doing is they are able to cheat the people or the banking customers, because the banking customers do not have all the relevant information or they are not tech savvy. They are basically losing out or losing all of their hard-earned money. So RBI now says we will set up a fraud registry. We will set up a fraud registry wherein in real time we'll keep on adding all the phone numbers which are used to commit these particular frauds and will block these particular phone numbers. We will also tell you the information from which regions they are coming, what is the phone number, etc. so that the payment service makers or the participants in the system will be aware of what to be concerned or which number to be concerned about. So this particular registry has been proposed by RBI now. Apart from this, how it is going to work, right, what is the methodology, etc. that details will be discussed later once the details are provided by RBI. Another important but small article is regarding financial inclusion and inclusive growth. If you have opened up the syllabus, GS paper 3 syllabus, by the way I am talking about civil services mains examination, you will see a term mentioned in the UPSC mains syllabus, that is inclusive growth. And be careful, the trend of UPSC has been that one question from the idea of inclusive growth is asked in the UPSC mains. And very recently, Finance Minister has given a statement which may very well be asked by UPSC. Financial inclusion, major step towards inclusive growth. Right, first and foremost, what do you mean by inclusive growth? As per World Bank definition, inclusive growth refers to the pace as well as the pattern of the growth. Sir, what do you mean by the pace as well as the pattern? Is it sufficient to have a high GDP growth rate alone, or along with the GDP, is it good to have development also in the economy? That is, let's take a very simple example. In the case 1, India achieves a GDP value of $5 trillion. Is it a good situation? Or case 2, where we are able to achieve a $5 trillion economy plus with very low number of people in the poverty, with very high incomes in the agriculture sector, with let's say very low pollution that we are causing, with let's say high number of employment generation, etc. Obviously you will have to a conclusion. By the way, if you are having a dilemma, you will have to conclude that C2 is better than C1. Case 2 is better than case 1. Why? Here we are simply achieving an output of $5 trillion. But in the second case, we are ensuring that with achieving the output worth $5 trillion, the benefits of that are reaching to other sections of society. That is the basic idea of inclusive growth, the pace as well as the pattern of the growth. This statement was given by the Finance Minister on the heels of Government of India announcing that Jan Dhan Yojana, which was implemented by the government from 2014, has completed 8 years. Remember this, Jan Dhan Yojana has completed 8 years and Government of India has given a data card. Please mug up the data so that if a question is asked in UPSC mains, you will have sufficient data to write. Under the Jan Dhan Yojana accounts, what is the total number of beneficiary accounts we have opened? 46 crore bank accounts have been opened. And if you put together all these particular bank accounts, right, more than 34 to 36 crore are operative, and the amount of deposits which have been mobilized from these particular bank accounts is more than 1 trillion rupees. More than 1 trillion rupees worth of bank deposits have been mobilized using these particular bank accounts. And out of this, more than 55% of the account holders are women, 67% are in rural and semi-urban areas. And the finance minister stated that we have been able to use this particular tool of Jan Dhan Yojana accounts for various schemes to implement under direct benefit transfer. For example, Government of India provides 6,000 rupees, the income support under the PM Kisan Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Kisan Samman Nidhi, PM Kisan Yojana. So the bank accounts which are used for transferring this particular income support is the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana accounts itself. So with implementation of the PMJDY, we have promoted financial inclusion. We are also ensuring that we are moving towards inclusive growth. This is the gist of the article provided here. Next, two more terminologies. The articles are not important. Discussion is important regarding the terminologies. One terminology that has been popping up very often in the newspaper article is concept of moonlighting, and second one, the term over leveraging. I'll tell you the context so that you understand the importance of these particular terms. Moonlighting has been discussed because Swiggy has become the first company in India to allow for moonlighting for their employees. I hope you understand. It has become the first company in India to allow their employees to moonlight. Now, what do you mean by moonlighting here? A particular person, let's say person A, who works from 9 to 5. He is there in a particular job, 9 to 5. Even after completion of this particular 5 o'clock, that is a normal job, he will take up additional work. He will work for, let's say, another company. He will work as a freelancer with someone else, etc. Now, why there is a term moonlighting here? Because these particular people either work after 5 o'clock, which is more associated with evening and night terms, and weekend, which is end of the week like this, we use the term moonlighting here. Now please understand, moonlighting is very normal, very common in a country such as UK as well as USA. Why? The governments there have legally recognized the idea of a moonlighting, and the people who are moonlighting will be able to generate more revenues, and a country such as USA says, you inform me how much income you are able to generate and pay me the taxes. I am okay with moonlighting. What about India? That is where the discussion actually starts. What about India? Some of the chairmen, or let's say some of the stakeholders in companies are against the idea of moonlighting. Some companies have clearly stated, no, we don't accept moonlighting as a norm. And some companies have stated, okay, that's a fact, that's a norm now. Because of the pandemic, there is a pressure on the people to earn more income. It will provide them with more security. Let's allow it. So some participants, some stakeholders are okay with moonlighting. Some are not okay with moonlighting. What is the argument of the people who are not okay with moonlighting? Their argument is, one, if you are going to work for me 9 to 5, you should not be doing any additional work. Why? If you do additional work after 5 o'clock, your productivity next day will get affected. Because let's say out of 24 hours, 9 hours you are spending in the office, and let's say remaining hours, out of that, rather than taking rest, rejuvenating yourself, taking, right, let's say some recourse to, right, other, let's say habits, etc., you are working, which means you are putting a lot of pressure on yourself. That will have an impact on your work productivity when you start working for my company. Now some of you will say, sir, you have written 9 to 5, but you said 9 hours. Let me make it 9 to 6 then. 9 hours, including the lunch break of 1 hour. And there is also concern over the data breach, privacy issues, etc. You are using, let's say, certain tools which have been provided by your company, certain software, certain, let's say, laptops, etc. Now, rather than using it only for the company business or company work, you will start using it for other work also. So there is an issue related to the data security also. So that is the precise reason many of these companies are not okay with moonlighting. But is it legal or illegal in India? Finally, everything boils down to whether it is legal or illegal. For sure, we cannot say it is legal, and for sure, we cannot simply say it is illegal. It is a very gray area right now. Why? The term moonlighting is very new. It's a very novel concept in India. And the laws which are there, for example, Factories Act or Establishment Act, they do not recognize moonlighting. Rather, there is a concept of dual employment. Remember this. There is this idea of dual employment. So even there is a gray area. Now, how can you find out whether you are allowed to moonlight or not then? Finally, experts basically say, look at your contract. Look at the contract that you have signed with your employer. In the contract, if they say single job, one job, terms like this, or if they have inserted a non-compete clause, generally it means you are not allowed to work anywhere else except this company. So that is the discussion related to moonlighting. So finally, sir, what kind of questions can be asked? The term moonlighting can be straightforward be asked in UPSC Prelims, or else the ethical dilemma related to moonlighting can be asked in ethics paper. Next, the final terminology for this particular week, the term or the concept of over leveraging. What do you mean by over leveraging? Every company borrows from the market. All of you will agree with this? Every company will borrow from the market. That is, they will have a debt from the market. The reason the term this was there in the current affairs was there was a survey which was conducted regarding Adani group of countries, and the survey basically concluded that Adani group of countries is over leveraged. It is highly over leveraged, very risky. So come to the idea here, a company borrows and the borrowing is nothing but a debt. So whenever the debt keeps on increasing, we'll simply say the company is over leveraging. The company has borrowed heavily from the market. The leverage ratio is very high. That is a problem. Why? Because generally the argument is when you have a very high amount of a debt, you are supposed to repay this particular debt along with interest, which means your liabilities are very, very high. And if something happens, your revenues are not up to the mark, profits are not up to the expected level, that will put a lot of pressure on the repayment. You might fall into a debt trap. That is the reason the term over leveraging was there in the newspaper. Done? So these are the various important topics as well as the questions related to these topics which have appeared in various business related newspapers from 27th August to 2nd September 2022. If you like the initiative, hit the like button. Provide your valuable comments in the section below, and if you have not yet subscribed to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS, kindly do it now. Thank you. Have a great day.